There's a particular kind of fear that lives in the space between wanting to be loved and believing you're too damaged to deserve it. Emma carried that fear like a second skin, worn so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. She wasn't broken by a single moment, but by 1,000 small fractures, tiny cracks that spread over years, until she convinced herself she was nothing more than shattered glass held together by sheer will. And then Nathaniel walked into the bookstore on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and everything she thought she knew about being unfixable began to unravel. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The bookstore smelled of old paper and vanilla candles, a scent Emma had learned to associate with safety. It was the only smell that didn't trigger memories she'd rather forget. The space was small, cramped with floor-to-ceiling shelves that leaned slightly inward, as if trying to embrace whoever walked between them. Soft yellow light from antique lamps created pools of warmth against the perpetual gloom of Seattle's gray skies. This place was hers, not legally. She only worked there, but emotionally. Here, surrounded by stories of people who didn't exist, she could pretend her own story wasn't so heavy. Emma was 28, but carried herself like someone much older, shoulders slightly hunched, as if preparing for an inevitable blow. Movements, careful and precise, taking up as little space as possible. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a tight bun, revealing a face that might have been beautiful if it ever relaxed. But it never did. Her hazel eyes held a permanent wariness, always scanning, always calculating exits, always ready to flee. She wore oversized sweaters in muted colors, beige, gray, soft brown, clothes designed to help her disappear into the background. And it worked. Most people looked right through her. She preferred it that way. Emma was reorganizing the poetry section when the door chime rang. She didn't look up immediately. She'd learned not to make eye contact unless absolutely necessary. But something made her pause. Perhaps it was the heaviness of the footsteps, measured and deliberate, or the way the air seemed to shift when he entered. When she finally glanced toward the door, her breath caught. He was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that filled out a charcoal gray peacoat, still dotted with rain. Dark hair, slightly too long, curled at his collar. A strong jaw shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes that made her freeze, deep brown, almost black, and impossibly gentle. He looked around the bookstore with an expression of genuine wonder, as if he'd stumbled into a cathedral instead of a cramped shop that smelled faintly of mildew. Tadokal immediately looked down, focusing intently on alphabetizing Neruda next to Plath. Her heart was beating too fast. She hated when it did that, when her body betrayed her with reactions she couldn't control. The footsteps approached. She could feel him getting closer, could sense the warmth of another person invading her carefully maintained bubble of space. "Excuse me." His voice was deep, textured like aged whiskey, with a softness that didn't match his size. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she placed the books on the shelf. She took a breath, forced her face into the neutral mask she'd perfected, and turned. "Yes?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper. He smiled, and something about it was different from other smiles she'd encountered. It didn't want anything from her. It just was. "I'm looking for a first edition of Leaves of Grass. I know it's a long shot, but someone told me this place occasionally has rare finds." Emma blinked. Not many people asked for Whitman first editions anymore. "We might," she said quietly. "The rare books are in the back. I'd need to check the inventory. I'd appreciate that." He extended his hand. "I'm Nathaniel." Emma stared at his hand for a moment too long. Large, strong, with long fingers and clean nails. A working man's hand, but refined. She hesitated, then briefly touched her fingers to his palm, the contact lasting barely a second before she pulled away. "Emma. Beautiful name," he said simply, not as a line, just as a statement of fact. She felt heat creep up her neck and quickly turned away. "Let me check the back." Emma fled to the storage room, pressing her back against the closed door and trying to steady her breathing. Why was her heart racing? Why did her skin feel too tight? She closed her eyes, counted to 10 the way her therapist had taught her, and forced herself to focus on the task. Rare books. Whitman, first edition. She found it 20 minutes later, buried in a box marked 1855, protected by acid-free tissue paper. The leather binding was worn but intact, the pages yellowed but complete. It was worth several $1,000s. Mr. Chen, the owner, had acquired it at an estate sale years ago and forgotten about it. When Emma emerged from the back, Nathaniel was sitting in the reading corner, a book of Mary Oliver poems open in his lap. He wasn't reading, just looking out the rain-streaked window with an expression of profound sadness that made Emma's chest tighten in unexpected recognition. "I found it," she said softly. He looked up, and the sadness vanished, replaced by genuine delight. "You did?" Emma approached carefully, holding the book out like an offering. "First edition, 1855. It's in remarkable condition." Nathaniel took it with reverent hands, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. This time, Emma didn't pull away quite as fast. He opened the book slowly, carefully, and read the first lines aloud. "I celebrate myself, and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." His voice transformed the words, gave them weight and meaning Emma had never quite felt before. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "My father used to read this to me," he said quietly. "He died 3 months ago. I've been looking for this edition ever since." Emma felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the wall she'd built so carefully. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it. Nathaniel wiped his eyes, not ashamed of the tears. "Thank you for finding this, for understanding why it matters." Emma wanted to say that she understood loss, that she knew what it meant to carry ghosts, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded. "How much?" he asked. Emma knew the book's value, knew Mr. Chen would want top dollar. But something in Nathaniel's grief, in his gentle way of holding broken things with care, made her say, 500. It was a fraction of its worth. Nathaniel studied her face. "That seems low." "It's what it's worth today," Emma said firmly, a rare moment of decision. He smiled again, that genuine smile that asked for nothing. "Then I'll take it." And he paused, looking at her with those impossibly gentle eyes. "Maybe you could help me with something else." Emma's walls immediately went up. "What?" "I'm new to Seattle. I'm a carpenter. Just opened a workshop down the street. I don't know anyone here yet, and I was wondering," he hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words, "if maybe you'd have coffee with me sometime. Just as friends. You seem like someone who understands that silence isn't always empty." Emma's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself, to maintain the distance that kept her safe. But something in the way he phrased it, just as friends, someone who understands silence, made her pause. "I don't really do coffee," she said carefully. "Tea. A walk?" Sitting in companionable silence while it rains. Despite herself, Emma felt the corner of her mouth twitch, almost a smile. "Maybe. Sometime." Nathaniel's face lit up as if she'd given him a gift. "I'll take maybe," Nathaniel came back to the bookstore 3 days later. Emma was shelving returns when she heard the door chime and felt that same inexplicable shift in the air. She didn't turn around immediately, but her hand stilled on the books. "I brought tea," his voice said from behind her. Emma turned slowly. He stood near the door, holding 2 paper cups, steam rising from their lids. He looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way that made him seem less intimidating. "You said you don't do coffee," he explained. "So I thought maybe tea. No pressure. I can leave it and go if you want." Emma should have said yes, should have maintained her boundaries, should have protected herself the way she'd learned to do. But there was something about the way he stood there, giving her complete control, making it clear he'd respect whatever she chose, that made her defenses waver. "What kind of tea?" she asked. "Chamomile with honey." The woman at the cafe said it was calming. Emma almost smiled again. That's the second time, she thought. Twice in 3 days, more than she'd smiled in 3 months. "You can stay." Nathaniel's relief was visible. He approached slowly, set 1 cup on the counter near her, and took his own to the reading corner, giving her space. Emma appreciated that more than he could know, the way he understood that proximity required invitation. They didn't talk much that first tea visit. Nathaniel read his new Whitman, occasionally glancing out the window. Emma continued shelving, acutely aware of his presence but not threatened by it. The silence between them was exactly what he'd promised, companionable, not empty. It held space for 2 people who'd forgotten how to be around others. When he left an hour later, he simply said, "Thank you, Emma." And she knew he wasn't just thanking her for the silence. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Always with tea, always with that same gentle respect for her boundaries. Slowly, incrementally, Emma found herself talking. Small things at first. A comment about a book, an observation about the rain. But Nathaniel listened, as if every word mattered, as if she was saying something profound instead of commenting on the weather. One afternoon, 6 weeks after they'd met, Emma asked him about his carpentry work. His whole face transformed when he talked about wood, about the grain and texture, about how every piece had a story written in its rings. "I work mostly with reclaimed materials," he explained. "Old barn wood, salvaged beams, things other people think are too damaged to use. But that's where the beauty is, in the imperfections, in the history. A perfect piece of new wood is just wood. But a piece that's weathered, scarred, survived, that's art." Emma felt something stir in her chest. "Do you really believe that? The damaged things can be beautiful?" Nathaniel looked at her with those gentle eyes. "I don't just believe it, I know it. The Japanese have this art called kintsugi. When a ceramic bowl breaks, they repair it with gold, highlighting the cracks instead of hiding them. The bowl becomes more valuable because it was broken." Emma's throat tightened. "That's just a metaphor." "Is it?" Nathaniel said softly. "Or is it the truth we're all too afraid to accept?" That night, alone in her small apartment, Emma cried for the first time in months. Not from sadness, but from something more complicated, a strange mixture of pain and hope that she didn't know how to name. 3 months after they met, Emma finally agreed to see Nathaniel's workshop. It was a Saturday, one of those rare Seattle days when the sun actually appeared, turning the city gold. She was terrified, leaving her safe space as always was, but something in her wanted to see where he created beauty from broken things. The workshop was in an old converted warehouse, exposed brick and high ceilings, with industrial windows that let in floods of natural light. The smell hit her first. Fresh-cut wood, varnish, linseed oil, earthy and honest. Nathaniel's tools hung on the walls, with the same reverence Emma showed her books, each one clean, cared for, respected. "This is where you work," she said, looking around in wonder. "This is where I remember who I am," Nathaniel corrected gently. He showed her his current project, a dining table made from reclaimed barnwood. The surface was covered in old nail holes, weather stains, splits, and cracks. But the way Nathaniel had sanded and finished it, each imperfection became a feature, a testament to survival. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, running her fingers over the rough texture. "Like you," Nathaniel said quietly. Emma froze, her hand stilled on the wood. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not beautiful. I'm broken." Nathaniel moved closer, but didn't touch her. He never touched without permission. "Emma, broken is just another word for having lived. Every crack in this wood is a story. Every scar is proof of survival. That's not damage. That's evidence of strength. You don't know," Emma's voice cracked. "You don't know what happened, what I've been through, what's wrong with me. So tell me." The invitation hung in the air between them. Emma felt panic rising in her chest. She'd never told anyone, not completely. Her therapist knew parts. Her sister knew fragments. But the whole truth, the complete story of how she'd been broken, she'd never given that to anyone. But standing in Nathaniel's workshop, surrounded by evidence that damaged things could be made beautiful, she found herself speaking. "I was engaged once," she began, her voice barely audible. "His name was Marcus. We were together for 3 years. I thought I knew him. I thought I was safe." She took a shaking breath. He was controlling, but it was subtle at first. Little comments about my clothes, my friends, my job. I thought he just cared. Then it got worse. He started isolating me. If I went out, I had to text him constantly. If I talked to another man, even a cashier, he'd accuse me of cheating. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I was better, he'd go back to the man I fell in love with. Nathaniel listened without interrupting, his face full of quiet pain. Then one night, Emma's voice broke completely. "I told him I wanted to postpone the wedding. I wasn't ready. I was starting to see that something was wrong. He got so angry. He'd never hit me before, but that night, he did. And he didn't stop." Tears streamed down Emma's face. I ended up in the hospital, broken ribs, fractured wrist, concussion. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he convinced me it was my fault, that I'd pushed him, that I deserved it. And I believed him, Nathaniel. For 2 more months, I believed him and stayed. Nathaniel's hands clenched at his sides, but his voice remained gentle. "How did you get out?" "My sister found me," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "She showed up unannounced and saw the bruises I'd been hiding. She physically removed me from that apartment, got a restraining order, made me press charges. He went to prison for 18 months. He's been out for 2 years now." Emma looked at Nathaniel, expecting to see pity or disgust or the fear she'd seen in other men's eyes when they learned her history. But his expression held only tenderness and quiet rage, not at her, but for her. "That's why I can't," she whispered. "That's why I'm too broken. I can't be touched without flinching. I can't trust. I can't sleep without nightmares. I can't be in a relationship because I'm terrified all the time. Everyone tells me I need to move on, to heal, to be normal again. But I can't. I'm too damaged." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Emma, look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are a survivor. There's a difference. Broken implies something that can't function anymore. But you're here. You work. You read. You drink tea with a stranger who won't leave you alone. You just told me the hardest truth you've ever had to speak. That's not broken. That's incredibly, impossibly strong." Emma shook her head. I'm afraid all the time. Fear isn't weakness. Fear is your body trying to protect you from being hurt again. That's wisdom, not damage. Nathaniel took a careful step closer. Can I tell you something? She nodded. I understand more than you think, he said quietly. My father, the one who read Whitman to me, he wasn't always gentle. When I was growing up, he drank. And when he drank, he became someone else. Someone violent. Someone terrifying. My mother left when I was 12. Couldn't take it anymore. But I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. Emma's eyes widened. I spent my entire childhood walking on eggshells, Nathaniel continued, never knowing which father would come home, the sober one who read poetry, or the drunk one who threw punches. I learned to make myself small, to disappear, to never make mistakes. When he finally got sober, I was 19. And you know what the hardest part was? Learning to trust his sobriety. Learning to believe he wouldn't hurt me again. Did you? Emma whispered. Learn to trust him? Eventually. It took years. But yes. And when he died 3 months ago, sober and kind and full of regret, I realized something important. Nathaniel's voice grew softer. Healing isn't linear. It's not something you do once and you're fixed. It's something you choose every single day. Some days you'll trust. Some days you won't. Both are okay. Emma felt tears streaming down her face again. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know you're not alone. Because I want you to know that being careful isn't the same as being broken. And because, Nathaniel hesitated, searching for the right words. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you found that book for me, and I need you to know that I will never, ever hurt you the way he did. Emma's breath caught in her throat. You can't love me, she said desperately. I'm too damaged. I can't give you what you need. I can't be touched. I can't be intimate. I can't be normal. Nathaniel's eyes held hers steadily. I don't want normal, Emma. I want you. Exactly as you are. If that means we never hold hands, that's fine. If that means we spend our whole lives drinking tea in silence, that's enough. I'm not here to fix you because you're not broken. I'm here because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be safe. Emma couldn't speak. Her entire body trembled with the weight of what he was offering. Unconditional acceptance, patience, safety, everything she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve. I'm scared, she finally whispered. I know, Nathaniel said gently. Me too. They stood there in the workshop, sunlight streaming through the windows, surrounded by broken things being made beautiful. And for the first time in 3 years, Emma felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. Over the next months, their relationship unfolded with excruciating slowness. Nathaniel never pushed, never demanded, never expected anything Emma wasn't ready to give. They continued their tea rituals at the bookstore. He started bringing her small gifts, never flowers or jewelry. Those felt too intimate. But books he thought she'd like. A first edition of Emily Dickinson's poems, a leather-bound journal with blank pages waiting for her story. Emma found herself talking more, sharing pieces of herself she'd kept hidden. She told him about her childhood in Portland, about her mother who died when she was 16, about how she'd always felt slightly out of place in the world. Nathaniel listened to everything with that same gentle attention, making her feel heard in a way she'd never experienced. 4 months into whatever they were calling this relationship, friendship felt too small. Romance felt too presumptuous. Emma invited Nathaniel to her apartment for the first time. It was a tiny studio with more books than furniture, plants on every surface because they were easier than people, and locks on the door, so many locks. Nathaniel noticed the locks but didn't comment. He just said, It feels like you. And somehow, that was the perfect thing to say. They sat on her worn couch, a safe distance between them, and talked until midnight. When Nathaniel stood to leave, Emma surprised herself by saying, "Stay." He froze. "Are you sure?" "Not for," she blushed furiously, "not for anything. Just to stay. I sleep better when someone else is here. My sister used to stay over, but she moved to California last month, and the nightmares are worse when I'm alone." Nathaniel's expression softened impossibly further. "I'll stay," he said simply. "Where do you want me?" Emma set him up on the couch with blankets and a pillow. She retreated to her bedroom but left the door open, a compromise between safety and trust. That night, for the first time in years, she slept through until morning without waking up screaming. When she emerged the next morning, Nathaniel was already awake, making coffee in her tiny kitchen. He'd found her bread and was making toast. "Morning," he said with a smile. "I hope you don't mind. I'm constitutionally incapable of sleeping past 6. Emma, still in her oversized sleep shirt and fuzzy socks, felt vulnerable in a new way. But Nathaniel's eyes held only warmth, no judgment, no expectation. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying. Any time, Emma. Literally any time." After that night, Nathaniel stayed over regularly, always on the couch, always respectful of her space. Emma found herself relaxing in increments so small she barely noticed them until she realized one day that she'd laughed at something he said. A real laugh, spontaneous and unguarded. They developed new rituals. Sunday mornings, Nathaniel would bring pastries from the French bakery down the street, and they'd eat them while reading the newspaper. Her on the couch, him in the armchair, existing in comfortable parallel. Wednesday evenings, Emma would visit his workshop and watch him work, the rhythm of his sanding and planing becoming a meditation she didn't know she needed. 6 months after they met, on a cold December evening, something shifted. They were in Nathaniel's workshop, and he was finishing a rocking chair made from reclaimed church pews. Emma was reading in the corner, wrapped in a blanket he kept there specifically for her visits. "Emma," Nathaniel said suddenly, setting down his tools. She looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "And you can absolutely say no." Her heart rate picked up, but she nodded. "Would it be okay?" He spoke carefully, measuring each word. "If I held your hand?" Emma's first instinct was panic, but she forced herself to actually consider the question. Did she want that? The idea terrified her, but underneath the terror was something else. Curiosity, longing, the desire to be touched without fear. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because I want to," Nathaniel said honestly. "Because we've known each other for 6 months, and I've respected every boundary you've set, and I think maybe you're ready. But if you're not, that's completely fine." Emma stared at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. They were shaking. "What if I freak out? Then I'll let go immediately. No questions, no pressure, no disappointment." She took several deep breaths, her therapist's voice in her head. "You're safe. You're in control. You can stop any time." "Okay," she whispered. But slow. Nathaniel moved from his workbench to the chair beside her. He held out his hand, palm up, letting her come to him. Emma stared at his hand, large and calloused, marked with small scars from years of working with wood. It was a hand that created beautiful things, a hand that had never hurt anyone. Slowly, so slowly she could stop at any moment, Emma reached out. Her fingers trembled as they approached his palm. The first contact was electric, terrifying, overwhelming. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, but she forced herself to stay present, to remember this was Nathaniel, not Marcus. This was safety, not danger. Her fingertips rested on his palm. Nathaniel didn't move, didn't grab, didn't close his hand. He just waited, letting her control everything. Emma took a shuddering breath and slowly, so slowly, slid her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers gently, his touch impossibly tender. He held her hand as if it were made of spun glass, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Okay?" he asked softly. Emma couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of release, of something long frozen finally beginning to thaw. She nodded. They sat like that for 20 minutes, just holding hands. Emma cried through most of it, but she didn't let go, and neither did Nathaniel. When she finally pulled away, her hand felt strange, buzzing with sensation. "That was," she started, but couldn't find words. "I know," Nathaniel said gently, wiping his own eyes. "Thank you for trusting me." Over the next weeks, they practiced touching. It sounded clinical, almost therapeutic, but that's what it was. Nathaniel would ask permission for everything. "Can I touch your shoulder? Can I hug you? Can I brush this hair out of your face?" And Emma learned to say yes without fear, or sometimes to say no, and have that be respected just as completely. The first time Nathaniel kissed her, it was Emma who initiated it. They were sitting on her couch, watching snow fall outside her window. She'd been thinking about it for days, wondering if she could, if she was ready. Nathaniel was talking about a new project, a bookshelf made from old ladder rungs, and Emma just leaned over and pressed her lips to his. He froze, clearly shocked. Then he kissed her back, so softly, so carefully, as if he might break her. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "Was that okay?" Emma asked, suddenly uncertain. Nathaniel laughed, a watery, joyful sound. That was perfect. But Emma's past wasn't finished with her. 2 weeks later, she saw Marcus at the grocery store, just a glimpse across the produce section, but it was enough. Her entire body went into immediate panic mode, heart racing, hands shaking, vision tunneling. She abandoned her cart and fled to her car, calling Nathaniel with trembling fingers. He was there in 15 minutes. He found her in the parking lot, hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. "Emma," he said gently, kneeling beside her car door. "You're safe. You're okay. Can I touch you?" She nodded frantically. Nathaniel gathered her into his arms, holding her tight while she fell apart. He didn't tell her to calm down, or that everything was fine. He just held her and let her be terrified. When I bunto mine until she could finally speak, Emma sobbed into his shoulder. "I thought I was getting better. I thought I was healing. But I saw him and I couldn't breathe. I can't do this, Nathaniel. I can't keep being broken." Nathaniel pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands cradling her cheeks. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "Healing isn't a straight line. You don't get better and stay better forever. There are going to be bad days. There are going to be moments when you're terrified. That doesn't mean you're not healing. It means you're human." "But I'm ruining everything," Emma cried. "You shouldn't have to deal with this. You deserve someone whole." Nathaniel's eyes flashed with something fierce. "Don't tell me what I deserve," he said, not angrily but intensely. "I deserve to love who I love, and I love you, all of you, the strong parts and the scared parts, the days when you're brave and the days when you can't leave your apartment. I love all of it because it's all you." Emma stared at him. "You love me? Did you think I was doing all this for fun?" Nathaniel smiled through his own tears. "Emma, I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me like I was safe. And I will keep loving you through every panic attack, every nightmare, every hard day. Because that's what love is. It's not just staying for the easy parts." That night, Emma asked Nathaniel to move in with her. It was impulsive, possibly crazy, but something about his declaration in the parking lot made her want to stop being so careful, to take a risk for once. Nathaniel looked at her seriously. "Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm never going to be sure about anything," Emma said honestly. "But I'm more sure about you than I've been about anything in years. And I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting Marcus win by keeping me small and scared. I want to be brave. I want to choose love even though it terrifies me." Nathaniel pulled her close. "Then yes, absolutely. Yes." He moved in the following week, bringing his clothes, his books, his tools, his gentleness. Emma panicked 3 times during the process, overwhelmed by the change, by the presence of someone in her space constantly. Each time, Nathaniel talked her through it, reminded her she was in control, offered to leave if she needed space. And each time, Emma chose to work through the fear instead of running from it. Living together revealed new challenges. Emma had nightmares several nights a week, waking up screaming, disoriented, sometimes swinging at whoever was near. The first time it happened with Nathaniel there, she nearly hit him. He caught her wrists gently, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "Emma, you're safe. You're home. It's Nathaniel. You're safe." When she came fully awake and realized what had almost happened, she was horrified. "I could have hurt you," she sobbed. "But you didn't," Nathaniel said simply. "And even if you had, it wouldn't be your fault. You were asleep. You were trapped in a memory. That's not you choosing violence. That's you surviving trauma." He started sleeping on top of the covers while she slept under them, a physical barrier that helped her feel safe. He kept a small lamp on all night because complete darkness triggered her panic. He learned to wake her from nightmares by saying her name from a few feet away rather than touching her first. They developed a system. When Emma needed space, she'd move a small wooden bird Nathaniel had carved for her from the kitchen counter to the bookshelf. That meant she needed to be alone, no questions asked. When she was okay with proximity but not touch, the bird went on the coffee table. When she wanted closeness, the bird stayed on the counter. It was a language built entirely around her needs, and Nathaniel learned it fluently. 3 months after he moved in, Emma's therapist asked if she'd consider couples counseling. It felt like an admission of failure at first, like they couldn't figure it out on their own. But Nathaniel pointed out that getting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Their counselor, Dr. Rivera, was a trauma specialist who understood that Emma's responses weren't character flaws, but survival mechanisms. She taught them communication techniques, helped Nathaniel understand his own childhood trauma responses, gave them tools for navigating triggers and panic attacks together. One session, Dr. Rivera asked Emma what she wanted from the relationship that she felt she couldn't have. Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Intimacy. Real intimacy. I want to be able to make love to him without being terrified. I want my body to be mine again instead of something Marcus stole." Nathaniel reached for her hand. "We'll get there," he said gently. "There's no rush." "But I want to," Emma's voice broke. "I want to be with you in every way. And I hate that I can't. I hate that he still has this power over me." Dr. Rivera leaned forward. "Emma, wanting something and not being ready for it, yet doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're honest. And the fact that you can articulate this desire is actually a huge sign of progress." 6 months ago, could you have said this out loud? Emma thought about it. No. 6 months ago, she could barely admit she wanted to hold hands. The path to physical intimacy was slow and sometimes painful. They started with Dr. Rivera's guidance, learning techniques for staying present in her body, for recognizing the difference between past and present, for giving Emma complete control over every moment. Nathaniel never once expressed frustration with the pace. When Emma apologized for being difficult, he'd say firmly, "You're not difficult. You're healing. There's a difference." One evening, 8 months after Nathaniel moved in, Emma asked if they could try. "Just try," she said nervously. "And if I need to stop, we stop. No matter what, no questions." Nathaniel looked at her seriously. "Are you sure you're ready?" "No," Emma admitted. "But I want to. Try anyway." They went slowly, painfully slowly. Nathaniel asked permission for everything, his voice steady and calm. "Can I kiss you? Can I touch you here? Is this okay?" And Emma learned to stay in her body, to feel sensation without dissociating, to say yes and mean it, to say stop and be heard immediately. There were moments when she panicked, when her body froze and her mind went to that terrible place. Each time, Nathaniel stopped instantly, held her while she cried, reminded her where she was and who she was with. There was never annoyance in his voice, never resentment, just endless patience. When they finally made love completely, it was nothing like Emma had feared. Nathaniel was so gentle, so attentive, so focused on her comfort and pleasure that she found herself able to stay present, to feel joy instead of just enduring. And when it was over, she cried in his arms, not from pain, but from overwhelming relief. "I did it," she whispered. "We did it." "You did it," Nathaniel corrected softly. "You were so brave." Emma looked up at him, this man who had waited months for her, who had respected every boundary, who had loved her through every panic attack and nightmare and moment of doubt. How did I get so lucky? Nathaniel kissed her forehead. I ask myself the same thing every day. A year after they met, Nathaniel proposed. Not with fanfare or public displays, but quietly in the bookstore where they'd first encountered each other. He'd built her something, a small wooden box with a hidden compartment, carved with lines from her favorite Emily Dickinson poem. "Open it," he said, handing it to her. Emma's hands trembled as she figured out the mechanism, sliding the secret panel to reveal a simple silver ring with a small sapphire, her birthstone. "I know we've done everything backwards," Nathaniel said softly. "We lived together before we even kissed. We've been to therapy together longer than most people date. But Emma, you are the bravest person I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life watching you heal, watching you grow, watching you become more yourself every single day." He took her hands. "I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to be healed. I'm asking you to be my wife, exactly as you are right now, with all your fears and all your strength. Will you marry me?" Emma was crying too hard to speak at first. She nodded frantically, then finally managed, "Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes." They married 6 months later in Nathaniel's workshop, surrounded by the beautiful things he'd created from broken wood. Emma's sister flew in from California. Nathaniel's mother came, sober now herself, full of quiet joy for her son. A few close friends, Emma's therapist, the owner of the bookstore where they'd met. Emma wore a simple cream dress, her hair down for once, loose around her shoulders. No veil. She couldn't bear the idea of fabric covering her face. Nathaniel wore a dark suit, but no tie, his collar open, relaxed. The ceremony was short, personal. They'd written their own vows. Nathaniel went first. "Emma, when I met you, I was hiding from the world just like you were. I'd convinced myself that being alone was safer than risking hurt. But you taught me that safety isn't the absence of risk, it's the presence of trust. You trusted me with your broken places, and in doing so, you showed me my own weren't beyond healing. I promise to honor your pace, to respect your boundaries, to love you on the hard days just as much as the easy ones. I promise to build a life with you where we both have room to heal, to grow, to become. I love you not despite your scars, but because of the strength it took to survive them." Emma was sobbing before he finished. When it was her turn, she pulled out a folded piece of paper, her hands shaking too much to trust her memory. "Nathaniel," she began, her voice wavering, "I spent 3 years believing I was too broken to deserve love. You proved me wrong, not by fixing me, but by loving me exactly as I was. You never rushed me. You never made me feel defective. You just showed up day after day with patience and kindness and tea." She paused, wiping her eyes. "You taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means building a future bigger than it. I promise to keep trying, even on days when I'm scared. I promise to trust you with my broken places and to hold yours with the same gentleness you've shown me. I promise to keep growing, to keep healing, to keep choosing love over fear. Because you're worth the risk. We're worth the risk." When they kissed as husband and wife, Emma didn't flinch. She leaned into it, into him, into the possibility of happiness she'd stopped believing in. The reception was small and quiet, more like an intimate dinner party than a traditional wedding celebration. But that was perfect for them. Low-key, comfortable, safe. Emma danced with Nathaniel to their song, Songbird by Eva Cassidy, her head on his chest, his arms around her, both of them crying happy tears. Later that night, in the small house they'd bought together, a fixer-upper that Nathaniel was slowly renovating, Emma stood at the window watching the rain. Nathaniel came up behind her, not touching, just present. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Emma turned to look at him. "I'm thinking about all the people who told me I'd never be whole again, that I'd never trust anyone, that I was too damaged for a real relationship. And I'm thinking about how they were wrong. Not because I'm fixed, because I'm not. I still have nightmares. I still panic sometimes. I still carry scars. But those scars don't define me anymore." She reached for his hand. "You showed me that wholeness isn't about being undamaged. It's about being loved completely, damage and all." Nathaniel pulled her close, and Emma let herself be held, really held, without fear. "You healed me," she whispered. "No," Nathaniel said gently. "You healed yourself. I just held space for you to do it." Emma thought about that. Maybe both are true. Maybe healing required both her own strength and his patient love. Maybe it wasn't one or the other, but the alchemy of two broken people choosing to build something whole together. That night, they made love slowly, tenderly, with the kind of intimacy Emma had once thought impossible for her. And when she fell asleep in his arms, she didn't dream of Marcus, or violence, or fear. She dreamed of wood and books, and hands that created beauty. She dreamed of safety. She dreamed of home. The first year of marriage wasn't easy. Emma had warned Nathaniel it wouldn't be, and he'd believed her intellectually. But living the reality was different from anticipating it. There were days when Emma couldn't get out of bed, paralyzed by anxiety for no reason she could name. There were nights when the nightmares were so bad that she woke up convinced Nathaniel was an attacker, her body going into fight mode before her mind caught up. The worst episode happened on a Tuesday in March. Emma had been doing well, feeling strong, even considering reducing her therapy sessions. Then she got a phone call from an unknown number. She answered without thinking, and Marcus's voice came through the line. "Emma, I've been thinking about you." She dropped the phone like it had burned her, her entire body going into immediate shutdown. When Nathaniel came home an hour later, he found her curled in the closet, shaking, non-responsive. It took him 20 minutes to get through to her, to bring her back to the present. That night, they filed a police report for violation of the restraining order. Marcus was picked up the next day, sentenced to another 6 months for the violation. But the damage was done. Emma spiraled into the worst depression she'd experienced since before she met Nathaniel. For 2 weeks, she barely spoke. She went through the motions, went to work at the bookstore, came home, sat staring at nothing. Nathaniel held her when she'd let him, gave her space when she needed it, and never once suggested she should just get over it. "I feel like I'm failing you," Emma finally said one night, her voice flat and exhausted. "You didn't sign up for this." Nathaniel looked at her with those steady, gentle eyes. "Yes, I did. I signed up for exactly this. For better or worse, remember? This is worse. That doesn't make it less worthy of my love. But it's been 2 weeks. I should be better by now." "Says who?" Nathaniel asked gently. "Who decided there's a timeline for healing from trauma? Who made that rule?" Emma had no answer. "Your therapist says trauma isn't linear," he continued. "That means sometimes you're going to go backwards. That's not failure. That's just how healing works." He took her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not when you're strong, and not when you're struggling. I'm here for all of it." Something in his certainty, his unwavering presence, finally cracked through Emma's numbness. She sobbed in his arms for an hour, finally releasing the terror and helplessness she'd been holding in. Dr. Rivera increased their sessions back to twice a week. She introduced new techniques, EMDR therapy to process the trauma more deeply, somatic experiencing to help Emma reconnect with her body. It was hard work, sometimes excruciating, but Emma committed to it with a determination Nathaniel found both inspiring and heartbreaking. By summer, Emma was stabilizing again. Not back to where she'd been. She'd learned that wasn't how trauma recovery worked, but finding a new equilibrium. She started a support group for domestic violence survivors, something she'd always been too afraid to do. Speaking her truth to other women who understood, hearing their stories, realizing she wasn't alone. It helped in ways individual therapy couldn't quite reach. Nathaniel supported her in everything. He came to group events when partners were invited, sitting quietly while women shared their experiences, his presence a testament to the fact that good men existed. Some of the women in the group had never had that, had never seen a man respond to trauma with patience instead of frustration. One woman, Sarah, pulled Emma aside after a meeting. "Your husband," she said quietly. "The way he looks at you, like you're precious. I've never had that." "Do you think I could?" Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes," she said firmly. "I thought I couldn't either. I thought I was too broken. But I was wrong. You deserve that too." That conversation stayed with Emma. She realized she'd gone from victim to survivor, to, maybe, possibly, someone who could help others make the same journey. The idea both terrified and excited her. She started writing. First, just in her journal, processing her experiences, finding words for feelings she'd never been able to articulate. Then, more formally, essays about trauma and healing, about what real love looked like after abuse, about the difference between being fixed and being accepted. Nathaniel read everything she wrote, his eyes often wet with tears. "You should publish these," he said, after reading a particularly raw piece about the first time she'd been able to make love without dissociating. "People need to hear this." "I don't know," Emma hesitated. "It feels so personal." "The best writing is always personal," Nathaniel said gently. "And you have something important to say. You could help people." Emma thought about Sarah, about the other women in her support group who were just starting their healing journeys. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, terrified and convinced she was unlovable. If her words could help someone else feel less alone, wasn't that worth the vulnerability? She started a blog, anonymous at first, writing under a pseudonym. She shared her story in pieces, not everything at once, but gradually revealing the journey from abuse to healing. The response was overwhelming. Women from all over wrote to her, thanking her, sharing their own stories, asking for advice. Emma realized she'd found a new purpose. Surviving Marcus wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could transform her pain into something useful, something that might help others. 2 years into their marriage, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She wanted to have a baby. The desire came suddenly, watching Nathaniel interact with his friend's toddler at a barbecue. He was so gentle, so patient, building block towers and reading board books with complete focus. Something in Emma's chest had tightened, a longing she'd thought Marcus had destroyed forever. That night, she brought it up tentatively. "Nathaniel, do you want children?" He looked up from the bookshelf he was building, surprised by the question. "I haven't really thought about it. I always assumed you wouldn't want to, given everything." "What if I do?" Emma asked quietly. "What if I want that with you?" Nathaniel set down his tools and came to sit beside her. "Then we'll talk about it. Really talk about it. Because that's a big decision, and we need to make sure you're ready." They spent weeks discussing it, with Dr. Rivera, with each other, examining every angle. Emma's fears were numerous and valid. What if pregnancy triggered her trauma? What if she couldn't bond with the baby? What if she passed on her anxiety? What if she was a terrible mother? But underneath the fear was something stronger. Hope, the desire to create life with this man who'd taught her what love really meant. The wish to prove to herself that Marcus hadn't stolen her entire future, just temporarily paused it. Dr. Rivera helped them create a plan. They'd work with a trauma-informed OB/GYN. Emma would continue therapy throughout the pregnancy. They'd take prenatal classes designed for trauma survivors. They'd be as prepared as possible, while acknowledging that nothing could prepare them for everything. 6 months later, Emma held a positive pregnancy test in shaking hands. She was terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. When she showed Nathaniel, he cried, holding her close and whispering, "Thank you," over and over. The pregnancy was hard. Emma's anxiety skyrocketed. Every doctor's appointment felt like an invasion. Being touched by medical professionals, even female ones, triggered her. She had panic attacks in the waiting room, once vomiting from sheer nervousness before an ultrasound. But Nathaniel was there for all of it. He held her hand through every appointment, learned medical terminology so he could advocate for her, worked with their doctor to create a birth plan that honored Emma's need for control and consent. The support group rallied around her, too. Several of the women had children, had navigated pregnancy after trauma. They shared their experiences, their fears, their triumphs. Emma learned she wasn't alone in finding pregnancy both miraculous and terrifying. One woman, Maria, said, something that stayed with Emma. "Every time I felt my baby move, I thought, this is mine. Marcus couldn't touch this. This is pure and new and completely mine." That helped Emma reframe her experience, to see the pregnancy not as vulnerability, but as reclamation of her body. When Emma went into labor, she was terrified. The loss of control, the physical intensity, the vulnerability, everything she'd worked so hard to manage, it all threatened to overwhelm her. But Nathaniel was there, exactly as he'd been from the beginning, steady, calm, present. He coached her through contractions, reminded her to breathe, advocated for her when the medical team wanted to do something she wasn't comfortable with. And when things got intense, when Emma felt herself starting to dissociate, to float away to that safe place in her mind where pain couldn't reach. Nathaniel's voice brought her back. Emma, stay with me. You're safe. You're strong. You're bringing our daughter into the world. Stay here. Stay with me. And she did. Emma stayed present through every moment of labor, every contraction, every push. When their daughter finally emerged, screaming and perfect, Emma sobbed with relief and joy and disbelief that her body, her broken body, had created something so beautiful. They named her Hope. It felt right. This child who represented everything Emma had thought she'd lost, everything Nathaniel had helped her find again. The early weeks of motherhood were chaotic. Emma struggled with breastfeeding, with the lack of sleep, with the constant touching and kneading that a newborn required. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the old panic threatened to surface. But Nathaniel was there, taking night shifts when Emma needed sleep, holding Hope when Emma needed space, reminding her constantly that she was doing beautifully, that she was exactly the mother Hope needed. And slowly, surprisingly, Emma found herself bonding with this tiny person in ways that healed something deep inside her. Hope's complete dependency, her absolute trust, the way she relaxed in Emma's arms, it was the opposite of everything Emma had experienced with Marcus. This was pure love without fear, vulnerability without violence, trust without betrayal. One night, 3 months after Hope was born, Emma was nursing her in the rocking chair Nathaniel had built. The baby's tiny hand was wrapped around Emma's finger, her eyes drifting closed in contentment. Nathaniel came in quietly, just watching them. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked softly. "That I can't believe how far you've come," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 3 years ago, you could barely let me hold your hand. Now look at you. You're nurturing a whole human being." Emma looked down at Hope. "Some days I still can't believe it either. Some days I still feel broken." "We're all a little broken," Nathaniel said gently. "But broken doesn't mean worthless. You proved that." Emma thought about the wooden objects in their home, the table made from barn wood, the bookshelf from ladder rungs, the rocking chair from church pews. All of them had been broken, damaged, discarded, and Nathaniel had made them beautiful. Maybe that was the truth about all of them. They were reclaimed materials, damaged by life, scarred by experience, but still capable of becoming something beautiful, something functional, something whole in their brokenness. Hope was 6 months old when Emma's blog was discovered by a literary agent. The woman had been reading Emma's anonymous essays and wanted to know if Emma would consider turning them into a book. A memoir about healing from domestic violence, about finding love after trauma, about learning to trust again. Emma's first instinct was to say no. Publishing meant going public, attaching her real name to her story, letting the world see her at her most vulnerable. But she thought about all the women who'd written to her, thanking her for making them feel less alone. She thought about the younger version of herself, broken and bleeding in a hospital bed, convinced she'd never be whole again. What would that Emma have given to read a story like hers, to know that healing was possible? She talked to Nathaniel, to Dr. Rivera, to her support group. Everyone encouraged her to at least consider it. "You have something important to say," Dr. Rivera told her, "and you're strong enough now to say it." Emma met with the agent, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd survived her own abusive relationship decades ago. "This isn't about exploiting your pain," Patricia said gently. "It's about transforming it into something that can help others. You get to control the narrative. You get to decide what to share and what to keep private." Over the next year, Emma wrote her book. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Harder than testifying against Marcus. Harder than her first night alone after leaving him. Harder than learning to trust Nathaniel. Every word required her to revisit trauma she'd worked so hard to process, to relive moments she'd rather forget. But it was also cathartic. Writing gave her control over her story in a way she'd never had before. She could shape it, find meaning in it, trace the arc from victim to survivor to thriver. She could be honest about the hard parts while also celebrating the victories, the small moments of healing that had accumulated into transformation. Nathaniel supported her through all of it. On days when the writing was too much, when Emma was too triggered to continue, he'd take Hope and give Emma space to fall apart. On days when the words flowed, when Emma felt powerful and purposeful, he'd celebrate with her, reading chapters and crying at her honesty. The book was published 18 months later, titled Reclaimed, a reference both to Nathaniel's work with salvaged wood and to Emma's reclamation of her own life. The cover was simple, a photograph of one of Nathaniel's creations, a beautiful table with visible scars and cracks, each one highlighted rather than hidden. Emma was terrified of the book's reception. What if people judged her? What if Marcus read it and came after her again? What if she'd shared too much? But the response was overwhelming. Women wrote to her in droves, thanking her, sharing their own stories, asking for advice. Domestic violence organizations invited her to speak. Therapists recommended the book to their clients. It became, surprisingly, a bestseller. Emma started doing speaking engagements, talking about trauma and healing at conferences and support groups. It was terrifying at first, being so public about her pain. But she found power in it, in standing in front of crowds and saying, "I survived. I healed. You can too." Nathaniel came to many of her talks, sitting in the back row with Hope in his arms, his presence a living testament to the happy ending Emma promised was possible. After one particularly emotional talk, a young woman approached Emma in tears. "I'm still in it," the woman whispered. "I can't leave. I don't know how." Emma took her hands. "You're here," she said gently. "That means part of you knows you deserve better. Hold on to that part. And when you're ready, there are people who will help you leave safely." She gave the woman her card, the number for a domestic violence hotline, the name of her therapist. 3 months later, Emma got a letter from the woman. She'd left. She was safe. She was starting to heal. "Thank you," she wrote. "You gave me hope." Emma cried when she read it, showing the letter to Nathaniel. "This is why I wrote the book," she said. "For her. For all the women who think they're too broken to leave, too damaged to heal." Nathaniel pulled her close. "You're changing lives, Emma. You took your pain and turned it into purpose. That's not just survival. That's triumph." As hope grew, Emma found herself thinking a lot about the legacy she was leaving her daughter. She wanted Hope to grow up knowing her mother's story, not the sanitized version, but the truth. She wanted her daughter to understand that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up. That healing wasn't about becoming unbroken, it was about living fully despite the breaks. One evening, Hope was 3. Emma was tucking her into bed when the little girl asked, "Mama, why do you have bad dreams sometimes?" Emma's breath caught. Hope had heard her wake up screaming a few times, had seen Nathaniel comforting her. She'd been dreading this conversation, but she'd also promised herself she'd always be honest with her daughter. "Because something scary happened to me before I met your daddy," Emma said carefully. "And sometimes my brain remembers that scary thing and gets worried, even though I'm safe now." Hope's little brow furrowed. "But Daddy keeps you safe." "He does," Emma agreed. "And I keep myself safe, too. That's important. We take care of each other." Hope seemed to accept this. Then she asked, "Will I have bad dreams, too?" Emma felt her heart clench. Maybe sometimes, she said honestly. Everyone has bad dreams sometimes. But if you do, me and Daddy will always be there to help you feel better. Okay, Hope said simply, already satisfied and drowsy. 5 years after Emma and Nathaniel married, he completed his most ambitious project yet, a community workshop where he could teach woodworking to at-risk youth and domestic violence survivors. The idea had come from Emma's work, from seeing how many people needed both practical skills and therapeutic outlets for their trauma. The workshop was in the same warehouse where Nathaniel had first told Emma about kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. It felt full circle somehow, taking a space that had witnessed Emma's own healing and turning it into a place where others could find the same. The grand opening was a community event. Emma's support group came, along with people from local shelters, youth programs, and therapy centers. Nathaniel gave a speech about the healing power of creating with your hands, about how working with wood could teach patience, precision, and the beauty of imperfection. Emma stood in the back, holding Hope's hand, watching her husband inspire a room full of people who needed exactly what he was offering. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and Emma realized something profound. Nathaniel had healed her, not by fixing her broken places, but by showing her that broken places could be beautiful. And now he was offering that same gift to others. The workshop became wildly successful. Nathaniel taught teenagers how to build furniture, how to repair broken things, how to create beauty from salvage. He taught women leaving abusive relationships how to trust their own hands again, how to make something sturdy and lasting, how to believe in their ability to build new lives. Emma volunteered there too, leading writing workshops for anyone who wanted to process their experiences through words. She found that the combination of creating physical objects and telling stories had profound therapeutic effects. People who couldn't talk about their trauma could sometimes express it through the grain of wood or the structure of a sentence. One woman, Lisa, came to the workshop after leaving her husband of 15 years. She'd never used power tools, had been told her entire marriage that she was too stupid, too clumsy, too incompetent to learn. Under Nathaniel's patient instruction, she built a bookshelf. It wasn't perfect. There were uneven joints and visible mistakes. But when it was done, Lisa cried. "I made this," she kept saying in wonder. "Me. I built something that will last." "Exactly," Nathaniel said gently. "And if you can build a bookshelf, what else can you build? A new life, maybe." Lisa looked at him, at Emma, at the workshop full of people learning to create instead of just survive. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I can." Emma's memoir had led to a second book, a practical guide for survivors navigating the early stages of leaving abuse. Then a third, focused on how partners could support trauma survivors. Each book reached more people, created more conversations, normalized the messy reality of healing. She was asked to testify before congressional committees about domestic violence resources. She consulted with therapists on trauma-informed care. She became, much to her surprise, a voice for people who felt voiceless. But the work that mattered most to her was still the quiet, one-on-one conversations. The woman who pulled her aside after a talk to say, "I left because of your book." The teenager in Nathaniel's workshop who learned to build a table and then found the courage to report her abusive father. The man who read her third book and finally understood why his girlfriend flinched when he moved too fast. These were the moments Emma lived for, the proof that pain shared could become pain transformed, that her story, as ugly and difficult as it had been, could light the way for someone else. Hope turned 5, started kindergarten, already showing signs of her parents' creativity, drawing elaborate pictures and building complex structures with blocks. She was confident in a way Emma had never been as a child, secure in the knowledge that she was loved completely, protected fiercely, encouraged constantly. One day, Hope came home from school upset. A boy had pushed her on the playground. Emma's protective instincts flared immediately, but she forced herself to ask calmly, "What did you do?" "I told him that's not okay, and walked away," Hope said proudly. "Like you and Daddy taught me. My body is mine, and nobody gets to hurt me." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "That's exactly right, baby. I'm so proud of you." She told Nathaniel about it that night, after Hope was asleep. "Our daughter knows her worth," she said wonderingly. "She knows she deserves to be treated with respect. She'll never doubt that the way I did." Nathaniel pulled her close. "Because of you," he said. "Because you broke the cycle. Because you refused to let your trauma define her childhood." Emma thought about that, about the cycles she'd broken, the patterns she'd refused to repeat. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, terrified, convinced she was too damaged for happiness. And she thought about who she'd become, not despite the trauma, but through the hard work of healing from it. She thought about her marriage, imperfect and beautiful, built on honesty and patience and the daily choice to trust. She thought about her daughter, growing up knowing she was safe, valued, loved. She thought about the workshop full of people learning to create beauty from broken things. She thought about the women who wrote to her, saying, "You gave me hope." This was redemption, Emma realized. Not the absence of scars, but the transformation of them into something meaningful. Not forgetting the pain, but refusing to let it have the final word. That night, Emma pulled out her journal, the one Nathaniel had given her years ago. She turned to a blank page and wrote, "There's a particular kind of strength that comes not from never breaking, but from choosing to heal. I spent years thinking I was too damaged for love, too broken for happiness, too scarred for a full life. I was wrong. The cracks are where the light gets in. The breaks are where the growth happens. The scars are proof I survived." She paused, thinking about how to finish, then wrote, "I am not broken. I am reclaimed. And that makes all the difference." Emma closed the journal and looked around their bedroom, at the furniture Nathaniel had built, at the photos of hope on the walls, at the life they'd created together from the wreckage of their separate pasts. She thought about all the people who'd told her she'd never heal, never trust, never love again. They were wrong, and she was proof. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul.